In this session, I'll be talking about how nonviolent communication can support us in deepening our intimate relationships. And let's start with a dialogue that is likely to be heard in almost any intimate relationship, at least variations of it. One person says to the other, "Do you love me?" And the other person said, "Oh, yes, of course." And the first person said, "But I want you to be really sincere about this. So, please, I want you to seriously look at this. Do you love me?" And the other person seriously contemplates this and waits and thinks and then finally said, "Yes, I really do." And the first person said, "Then why did it take you so long to respond?" This question's very important, do you love me? And it's very hard to answer because we very often don't get clear in intimate relationships what we really mean by that word love. Some people use the word love as a feeling, an emotion, and if they do that, it's pretty hard to know how to answer that question without reference to a specific time and place, because feelings change every few seconds. In nonviolent communication, we use the word love as a need, and a very important need. And what's very important then is to know how to manifest this need, what to do to contribute to that need being met in the people that we care for and that we have intimate relationships with. I have found in working with couples for many years that the best way that we can really meet people's need for love is to do two things. To, first of all, express those needs within us, those messages within us that are the hardest to express, the most scary to express. Because when we have that ability to share that which is not easy to express, we get a chance to get these needs fulfilled. But if we are so frightened of expressing these needs that we don't say anything, that creates barriers in the relationship. Yet it's very difficult for many reasons for people to express these needs that need to be expressed in intimate relationships. And when they do express the need, very often it's done with an energy that provokes the very opposite of what we would really like. And the reason for that is that instead of seeing expressing needs as a gift to other people, in the culture that we've lived within for about 10,000 years, needs get associated with something very negative. They get associated with being needy. They get associated with being selfish, egocentric. So as a result, when we do express the need, we often do it with that energy behind it. And that leads the need to be heard by other people often as something that is very negative. The more I kind of apology for having the need and justifying it, the harder it is for the other person to give out of a loving energy. So what's very important is to develop a consciousness that our needs are a precious gift if they are expressed in a way in which we are not demanding that the person meet our request in relationship to our needs. If the other person trusts that when we say our needs and we follow it with a request, that we only want them to do it if they can do it willingly, joyfully. So when we have this consciousness that our needs are a gift, we then express them with a totally different energy, an energy that makes it much easier for the other person to enjoy receiving our needs and makes it much easier for them to respond out of the joy of giving. So the intent behind expressing our needs in an intimate relationship is very important, that we see the need as a gift. And then there's two other things that are very important in expressing needs, and that is that we follow the need that isn't being met, that we would like to have fulfilled, with a clear request. If we simply express the need without the request, it often leaves the other person in a position either of not being too clear what we want, or with the idea that we expect them to know what we want them to do about it. So once we have expressed a need that isn't being met, we need to follow it with a very clear request. And then, as I said in prior sessions, we want to be sure that the other person hears a request and not a demand. And that's often not easy. Because especially in an intimate relationship, given what some people have been taught about intimacy and love, if they hear a need of somebody they care for, they can turn it into something they have to do something about. They believe that they are responsible for this other person's happiness, and therefore they must do what this person wants. When we receive the other person's needs in this way, if we do what they want, they'll pay for it. They'll pay for it because we are not giving out of a joyful energy. We're giving out of expectation energy, should energy, or we're giving out of energy to buy the other person's love. When we give out of this belief that if I am a husband or a wife, it's my responsibility to make the other person happy. I'm responsible for their well-being. This confusion about what responsibility means, this thinking that it means I'm responsible for the other person's happiness, puts us into a very awkward bind, because we can only be responsible for that over which we have some control. We can only control what goes on within ourselves. We can't control what goes on in others. So when I trick myself into thinking I'm responsible for my partner's happiness, I'm taking on a job that I can't do. I cannot make the other person happy. I can only be responsible for my own actions, my own intentions. The other person is responsible for how they take what I do, how they interpret it, and what they do to get their needs met. So keeping this concept of responsibility clear is very important in intimate relationships. It's very important to see that we cannot be responsible for other people's happiness. We cannot be responsible for other people's actions. We're responsible for our own intentions and actions. So when we take responsibility for other people's feelings, whenever they are in distress, we feel pressure. We have to do something about it. It's our job to make the person feel better. This will take all joy out of anything we do to contribute to the other person's well-being. What other people say or do can't hurt us. It's how we take it. If somebody says no to us, that can't make us feel bad. It's how we interpret the no. But we lose this consciousness as we get educated in a way that makes interdependence not what happens in intimate relationships, but codependence, where people take on responsibility for each other's happiness, and that requires giving up your own honesty, your own integrity. You must always do what the other person wants to make them happy. That soon makes the person that we have the deepest relationship with the biggest burden of all. That's why it's so much easier for many people to respond to a need of a neighbor than it is to respond to the person that they're the closest with. Men and women seem to get different kinds of cultural education that make intimacy difficult for them in different ways. Cultural programming that says that loving women have no needs. So to demonstrate their love for others, they believe that you must suppress your needs in favor of the other person. Men, on the other hand, seem to have a real difficulty expressing their feelings, especially any feelings that imply vulnerability, like feeling hurt or sad or lonely. They are educated in the concept of masculinity. You're not supposed to have such vulnerable feelings. One of the messages that is very important to know how to say in an intimate relationship is no, especially when the person that we care for has some need that seems very strong at the moment and they're in some pain. But things within us are going on such that we can't really give with the kind of energy that nonviolent communication recommends that we give out of. That is, that we do it totally willingly. We're not giving in or giving up. So how do we say no under these very difficult conditions? How do we say no if there's, for whatever reason, something that keeps us from doing it out of joy, out of willingness, out of making sure that we're not giving in or giving up? How do we say no? Well, the first step in saying no is to make empathic connection with the other person's needs. The empathic connection lets the other person know that we do care about their needs. We show that care by taking the time to stop and really connect with what's going on in them. Sometimes this can be just non-verbally communicated. They can see in our eyes that we are really with them. We see their needs. Or sometimes we might express it verbally in response to my having said that I'm lonely and would like some company, and to ask them to come over and sit with me and talk for a while. We might say, so you're really lonely this evening and really need some connection. That's an important step in saying no, to begin by either verbally or non-verbally communicating that we are with them in the need. We see what's going on in them. If we're so tense about the fact that we're not wanting to do what the other person is asking us to do, that the first thing they see in our eyes is some tension or fear, they can easily mistake that we have received their need not as a gift, but as something negative. So we start with this empathy for the other person's needs when we say no, and then we follow it with the need of ours that keeps us from willingly being able to do what they're asking of us at this moment. So in some situation, it might be said this way: I have a need right now to take a lot of the pressure off myself of things that people are wanting of me at work. So I express here a need at this moment that's present in me that keeps me from being able to willingly contribute to what my partner might be requesting. But then it's important to follow the need that keeps me from saying yes with a request that searches for a way to get everybody's needs met. And that might sound like this: I'd like you to tell me if our getting together in about a half an hour would be okay for you. I think in that half hour I could release my tension and be able to be fully with you. So, to say no, we empathically connect with the other person's needs, silently or verbally. We say our need that keeps us from saying yes, and we end on a request that searches for a way to get everybody's needs met. We never say, I can't, I don't have time. We go through the process I mentioned, and then the person is better able to see that their need was received as a gift and that we care about their need, even if at this moment there's a need of ours that keeps us from doing what the person wants. Now, if our partner doesn't know how to say no in this way, we need to be prepared to know how to deal with somebody who doesn't know how to say no and who either gives in because they hear a demand or responds in other ways that are hard to live with. So what are some of these hard ways to live with when our partners might hear our needs and requests as demands and not know how to say no in the way that I just outlined? Well, one way a person often says no when they hear a demand is no. And you can tell from the tone of their voice that they heard a demand. They heard pressure upon them. Or, of course, another way that some people handle a request they don't want to respond to, they make a diagnosis of what is wrong with the person for having the need. And so if we're going to be good at expressing our needs, we want to be sure that we are prepared to deal with somebody who gives us a diagnosis for having our needs and who says things to us like, you're too sensitive, you're too dependent, you're too this, you're too that. Whatever it is that they diagnose us at, if we don't empathically connect with what's going on in them when they say that, if we take that there is something wrong with us for having our needs, we have just given that person some power that's not good for either of us. We've given them the power to make us feel that our needs are something negative, that they are caustic. So it's very important that we know how to respond empathically to people when they do respond that way to our needs, when they say no, or when they say these diagnoses of us for having the needs. We need to hear the feelings and needs behind their no or behind the criticism, judgment, diagnosis that they make of us for having the needs. If they say back, you're so dependent, can't you take care of yourself? I got to be sure that I don't hear what they think of me. I got to be sure that I go right to their heart and hear what are they feeling, what are they needing when they say that. And so I might respond this way. So are you frustrated right now because you're wanting to do what you've chosen to do and not give that up because you think you need to take care of me? And if the other person says, you're darn right, then I might want to do what is necessary to help them learn how to hear my need as a gift and my request as gifts and not as demands. And I might say to the person, can you tell me how I could have expressed my needs and requests to you so that it would be a gift to you and not as a demand? This is asking them to make a difference that's not easy for people to make, given how we have been trained to think about intimate relationships, which requires us to give up ourselves and take care of the other person. So I might have to repeat that. How can I let you know what my needs are and what I'm requesting of you so that you can trust that I only want you to do it if you can do it joyfully, that it's not giving in or giving up? And this is pretty complicated for someone to understand, so they might still look very perplexed. And I may want to let them know why this is so important to me. I might say, I'd like you to see that right now I have two options that I see that I don't like having only these two options. The two options are, if I have some needs and requests, to express them, but then if you hear it as a demand, you either then get upset and say no, or you give in. Either way, it's not what I would like. Or if I keep my needs to myself, then that limits the honesty between us, and it limits my ability to get my needs met from you at times, when it might be good for both of us. So, how can I express my needs and my requests so that you receive it as a gift, that you're conscious that I only want you to give if it's from the heart, willingly, and never done out of fear that I won't love you if you don't do it, fear that I will take it as a rejection and get hurt and depressed? So this is very important to work out in intimate relationships, how each party can hear each other's needs when they are expressed in a way that they trust that the partner only wants them to give if it can be done willingly. Of what happens when we don't express our feelings and needs honestly, and what can happen when our partner does express their feelings and needs openly and honestly, but we don't receive it empathically. When we do that, the person that we love the most can soon become a festival of pain. Another problem that often makes it hard for people to enjoy giving in an intimate relationship is when their partner skips the need and just expresses their pain and goes immediately to a strategy. If a person says to their partner, I'm feeling very hurt. You've only, been home 2 days out of the last month in the evening. Would you please correct your schedule so that you are home at least 4 evenings a week? Now, notice what that person has expressed. They've expressed an observation at the amount of time the other person has been home in the evening, and their pain was expressed, but they skipped over the need and went to a strategy. Now, one could assume that wouldn't the other person assume that and guess that the need behind that was for some closeness, for some intimacy that wasn't being met? Well, it's not too likely in my experience that the person on receiving that message is going to be able to do that very easily when the need is not expressed. When they hear the pain and immediately the pain is followed by a request, very often in my experience that request is going to be heard as a demand. So it's very important when we are in a good deal of pain about something that we be conscious that it's by really focusing on our need, making the need clear and our feelings clear. It's that information that when people have that focus, then specific strategies that are requested have a whole different taste to them than if the person goes from the pain to the request. I have suggested an activity to many couples that have consulted with me and who are interested in how can we deepen our relationship. I've said, let me suggest a scary exercise for you. Let me suggest that in your lives that you give space, regular space, to dealing with a scary question. And that scary question is, what am I afraid to tell you? And that when you take the time to do this, the person who responds by saying what is a scary message to say really works hard at expressing that in a way that makes it clear to the other person that there's no criticism or no demand intended in what they say. And it's very important that the other person really be conscious of when people are in the most pain and have the most scary messages to say. Those are the ones we need to be sure we just hear what they're feeling, needing, and requesting, and never hear any criticism or demand. Now, not too surprisingly, one of the things that people in relationships find most difficult to talk about is their sexuality, and to make it clear whether their needs relative to sex are being met. So one of the things that we recommend is that they get so good at expressing these scary messages that they don't wait to express them when they are sitting down and have time to express them, but that they learn to express these scary messages even while they're having sex. In fact, we suggest that to really enjoy sex, you have to know how in the middle of sex to communicate clearly scary messages. Well, it may have that association of not being very romantic, and it may go against the cultural programming that if you're really a competent man and woman, you don't have any problems in your sexual relationships, they just flow. But the reality is that to the degree to which you can be honest about such sensitive issues, even in the middle of the sexual act, I predict it's one of the best ways to finally enjoy sexuality more and more. Now that could sound like this. One partner is in a mood for sexuality and communicates non-verbally that they might be open to this by reaching over and touching their partner in a sensitive part of the body in a gentle way, trying to communicate, I'm getting turned on and would really like to get into sex with you. Now, the other party might be really wanting to finish reading what they were reading, and they were really involved in it. Now, how do you, when you sense your partner right now is really in a mood for sexuality, how do you respond to that? Well, some people would deny their needs and feel like, oh my goodness, I have to please my partner now. So they might put down what they were reading and put on a pseudo smile and say, hey, what's going on? But now, if they do that and continue with the sexual act when they're not really into it, the other person is highly likely to be sensing that they're not into it, and it's probably not going to be a very enjoyable experience for both people. Or if it is for one, to the one who gave in, it's going to have some association with sexuality that both people will pay for, because if we give up our needs for our partner in any aspect of relationships, everybody pays for it eventually. So if the people are courageous and skilled at honesty, as nonviolent communication supports, the person who was reading would again start with empathic response to the other person, either non-verbally, just showing by our look that we see the other person is reaching out to us sexually, or might just say words that show that. Looks like you'd like some real closeness and love, honey. And the other person said, yeah. And now comes how to say no honestly, as we've talked about. Person might say, I'm torn right now. I really would like to get into it with you, and yet at the moment I'm not really there. I'm kind of caught in this article I'm reading. How would it be for you if we get into this in about 20 minutes? So that would be how to express oneself even in the middle of intimacy, when our needs may not coincide at that moment. When the needs are not the problem there, of course, it's the strategy. Because in that case, the problem was that one person would like to get into the sexual act, but not at this moment. Their strategy was for in a different time. Well, of course, if we are going to be honest like that, we've got to be prepared for the other person not receiving the message empathically. They might just be hearing that as a rejection, and their response might sound something like this. Forget it, I'm sorry I reached out. I should have known that that reading material was more important to you than our relationship. So we've got to be prepared anytime we express ourselves vulnerably. We've got to be prepared to empathically deal with what comes back. So in that case, then, the person might say, so, sounds like you're feeling really hurt. You were really in the mood right now for some real closeness and intimacy and are disappointed. So we do not take the other person's statement as now we have to give in and take care of them. That wouldn't be good for either. Now in that situation where we respond with words when we see the other person wanting to get into physical activity. Someone might say, isn't that going to destroy the beauty of our intimacy with others when we need to talk in the middle of something? So if somebody reaches out and touches you in this gentle way, wouldn't it be more loving to put down whatever you were working on and get into their energy in whatever way you could? Well, that's one way that people define intimacy, that if you really care for people in an intimate relationship and you see what their needs are, you suppress your own needs and give to them. But my experience is that if we give any time out of an energy where we feel even slightly we have given in or given up our own self, both people pay for it, because that adds up, and each time we give in out of that, it does something to destroy the relationship. So if the person was honest in the way that I said, and the other person gets hurt by it, and the person who chose not to get into the sex act at that moment empathizes with the other person, if that dialogue continues so that in these very sensitive areas we're able to talk about it at the time and be honest and be empathic to the other person's response, that intimacy is very powerful. In fact, I believe that it is so powerful that when we have that quality of intimacy that we can be honest even at the most sensitive times. The other aspect of the intimacy, in this case the sexual act, it will get better in the future as a result of people being able to trust that the partner is fully there and there's no giving in or giving up. Now, of course, another thing that can get in the way of intimacy in heterosexual relationships are the stereotypes that we carry about what a man's job is and what a woman's job is. Many people carry the idea that there are certain jobs that the man should do, certain jobs that the woman should do. And that already creates some limits to the quality of connection the two can have, because then people are doing things out of should energy, out of have to energy, obligation energy. Nonviolent communication suggests that we really make sure that everything we're doing is done willingly, and it's done out of an energy that comes when we see that we are enriching life, and it's meeting our need to enrich life, so that we never feel as though we are sacrificing ourselves for the other people. When many of the women really do empathize and see a partner of theirs needing something, they automatically lose connection with themselves and start to do for the other person. But then they know later that that wasn't in harmony with their needs. They can tell from their feelings. There's a different energy when we are giving fully out of our own need to contribute to the other person's well-being. And that isn't mixed at all with this idea that it's our obligation or duty to care for the other person. Many of the men that I work with have a cultural stereotype that as a man, they are totally responsible for their woman's smile and happiness, so that if she's not smiling and happy, it means they have failed somehow as a man. And very often, this makes it hard for them to say no, because they're afraid that if they say no, their partner's going to be unhappy, and the very sign of the woman being unhappy, they interpret that I'm not a very competent man, especially if the woman is not satisfied totally sexually. Then many men take it as a sign of their own inadequacy, rather than just empathically connecting with the woman to find out how the woman's needs could be better met. But when we take responsibility for other people's feelings, rather than our own actions, that is when our giving is mixed and it doesn't contain the pure joy of giving that's necessary for relationships to be strengthened. We need to be sure that when we have needs, that we express those needs before going to strategies. If we go immediately to strategy without the need, it's easy for other people to hear this as a demand, as though we are only concerned with what we want. It's when the need is expressed that it can make it easier to give. And then this is also very important in resolving conflicts, that we're aware that when the needs are expressed and fully understood, conflicts can be resolved much easier than when the need isn't evident. When we express those feelings, those needs, which are the most scary for us to express. The not doing it is very costly in the relationship, and when we do it vulnerably, without criticism, without demand, and the other person empathically receives it, the relationship is going to be powerfully nurtured.